Welcome, everyone, to Advantaged, an Alloy Partners podcast. I am Drew Beechler, our VP of Marketing here at Alloy Partners, and your host today of Advantaged. If you're unfamiliar, Alloy Partners, we are a venture builder. We partner with leading organizations and entrepreneurs to help them create new startups through this process we call venture building. And today, this is the first episode actually in our second season that we're kicking off of Advantaged. And season 2, we are interviewing and having discussions with corporate innovators, founders, and investors all around venture building, startup, and enterprise engagements, and telling the stories of how corporates and startups can win together and how this idea of startup creation is evolving, really. And so today we're going to specifically talk a lot about a trend that we're seeing within kind of, I would say, quote unquote, traditional venture funds and VC funds that are starting venture studios in-house, and how these funds are embedding what we call advantage into these startups coming out of the studios. And so here today with me, we have myself, but also our managing director of studios at Alloy Partners, Ryan Larkham. Thanks, Ryan, for joining.
Great to be here.
And then we also are joined in person by a very special guest all the way from Japan, Yuma Tanaka. Yuma is an investment VP at DNX Ventures based in Japan. And DNX is an early stage VC firm focusing on B2B startups. They have an office in the US and an office in the Japanese market, though they're separate funds now. Today. We can talk about that too if we like that evolution over the time. And they invest specifically in seed, Series A startups, solving some of the biggest challenges for enterprise companies, SaaS, cloud, cybersecurity, deep tech, hardware, retail, et cetera. Arguably, they are the leading SaaS VC, I would say, in all of Japan. And so I'm very excited to have Yuma joining us today. We'll get into this a little bit more in our conversation. Yuma, DNX, and Alloy, we've had a long history of working together in a variety of fashions, but most recently we collaborated to create and launch DNX Studio, a B2B SaaS venture studio based out of DNX Ventures. And Yuma is in Indianapolis this week speaking at the Global Entrepreneurship Congress, and so we thought we would just sit down to record this conversation today while we're all together. And so it's actually amazing timing as well, because DNX Studio just wrapped up their second, very successful sprint week in Japan last week. Ryan was over in Japan, so we've got back and forth for both of you, which has been fun. So I'm super excited to have this conversation, talk about the creation of DNX Studio and the evolution of kind of what we're seeing within the kind of the venture fund space. So maybe to start us off, Ryan and Yuma, could you share maybe more just about our work, Alloy Partners' work with DNX, how this partnership came about, and even the decision to make and launch a venture studio together came to be?
Yeah, certainly. For those who might be new to the podcast, Alloy's history of venture building reaches back to leading B2B SaaS venture studio High Alpha. I was an employee early, and Elliot, Alloy's CEO, was also an early employee. And there we established this repeatable model for venture building. Scott Dorsey, who's the managing partner of High Alpha, also founded ExactTarget, which was acquired by Salesforce back in 2015. And he and the High Alpha team and his partners have experienced zero to IPO, an acquisition, B2B SaaS, and they've built over 60 companies in High Alpha Studio over 4 funds. So we've had all of these fun kind of overlapping relationships over time through the Salesforce acquisition. I met DNX Ventures managing partner Akira Kurabayashi, and nearly a decade later, we've been able to work with them, which I'm really excited about. DNX is extending their capabilities into building new ventures, and Alloy Partners, a natural partner as a result of our background in venture building.
Yep, thanks, Ryan. Thanks for having me. It's been an interesting journey so far. As you mentioned, DNX and Alloy have a long history together. Peter from ExactTarget is actually an advisor to DNX. He comes to our annual startup meetups. It's been a great experience working with Alloy. I was also a summer intern at Alloy during my MBA, which was an awesome time. DNX, more broadly, was interested in a venture studio method that was created by entrepreneurs, right? Especially this wonderful team that has experience in scaling a SaaS business. And so Alloy was a natural choice given our relationship and our mutual expertise. What we like especially about Alloy's approach versus different ways of creating super early stage startups is the ability to approach a problem and diving really deep into one specific domain or an idea versus what we see a lot happening where you host a batch of entrepreneurs hoping that something comes out, hoping for the best. We want to back ideas where we can build conviction alongside our entrepreneurs. And so this approach, this laser-focused approach was really good for us as well.
I love that. Ryan, you alluded to this, both of us going back a decade now, which is wild, in Venture Studio land. You even, I think it was 2-3 weeks ago, attended the Global Takeoff Summit, which is a summit hosted by Vault Fund all around kind of venture studios and what we're seeing kind of trends both there and even back over the last decade. We've seen this growing trend of venture funds increasingly moving into what I would call this idea of venture building, or even operating full-on venture studios. Venture building being, in my opinion, at least, just simply the act of creating a standalone startup from scratch rather than just investing in an existing startup. And then venture studio, the definition of that being just a repeatable process of systematically doing that creates a portfolio of these startups. And I think we've seen, it even goes back to early days like Sutter Hill, where it wasn't even systematic or structured, but a venture fund that they have an entrepreneur and kind of pre-idea, maybe even, where they develop this together. And they've done this. Snowflake is like the prime example, but also Pure Storage. Some even argue NVIDIA in some ways. These are decades old kind of companies now that have been creating this approach. But I think we're starting to see more and more funds do it in a structured way, at least now. Like, how do we tap into, and to your point, it's a lot about the talent pool of kind of these entrepreneurs. Maybe just there, like, why are we starting to see more and more of this interest, shifting of resources, people even creating kind of standalone funds and side venture funds around venture building and creating venture studios themselves? Curious, kind of just from your perspective, and even going down this route with DNX, how did that kind of come to be?
Venture building is definitely a big trend in Japan now. A couple of our competitors also have, I wouldn't call it quite venture building, but really early stage accelerator programs. Interest from overseas, Alchemist Accelerator, which is a prominent B2B focused accelerator, has entered Japan this past year after probably 10 years of thinking about it. Antler from Singapore has joined as well. And so this is really a big trend here. As for us, I think it comes on the back of a huge trend of VC funding. A lot of VC funds are being funded, especially in early stage. So you have a lot of competition, especially in early stage deals. And we were starting to see a lot of companies that have great potential, but that were not ready to be Series A backed, essentially. What that brings is this ticking time bomb of you have to scale quickly before a company is ready. And it does not do great for the entrepreneur. It's not great for the company. And so we wanted to go earlier and earlier to essentially find entrepreneurs that we really have conviction in and start working with them in building and go-to-market strategy together, for example. And so that's the backdrop of why we were interested in doing Venture Studio. As a firm, we've also matured, I think, with over a decade of SaaS investing. We've seen 100 or so SaaS companies in our portfolio. We feel more confident in giving firm guidance to entrepreneurs in terms of where they want to be at a particular stage. Our team has grown to include a lot of operators, multiple ex-startup CEOs, including myself. So we felt comfortable in delivering that advice through our investors as well.
Is there anything that you learned through the process, Yuma, of going through building ventures that ultimately then accretes to the investment thesis you have as well? Like sometimes just going through the process of building things, you actually figure out maybe it's better to invest in an area.
Yeah, we take a thesis-driven approach. When you go top-down into a certain area, certain companies as competitors or rising competitors that we would like to invest in rather than create on our own. And so from a VC perspective, this whole practice of doing a deep dive into an industry, into a specific problem or a customer really helps us build a robust investment thesis that's actionable. So that's been a great thing for us. One other thing I'd say is that through looking at early stage startups before they're even startups has given us a lot of visibility into kind of how entrepreneurs think about creating a product or attacking a market. So when we look at earlier startups, we can essentially track their thought process and look at that and contrast it with, say, the Alloy method of venture building. to understand how deeply an entrepreneur has thought about this space. So before we see a product, before we see revenue, I think we are able to assess startups in a way that we haven't been able to do before.
Oh, that's super cool. I love the way you think about like supporting entrepreneurs and finding the gaps because you have built things too, and you can help them to spot the gaps in what they build.
Yep.
One of the things that stuck out to me, just as an American's kind of perspective on Japan, was like to see the differences in our entrepreneurial cultures, right? The U.S. is built effectively by entrepreneurs, people who have left their home countries to come to a place and build new things. Japan is a very different culture, and the ability to have a place where people can come build that is safe, well-directed, perhaps even a place where after you have gone on to build a company, you can come back to and relaunch a company from, seems like a really unique way to get access to top tier talent, because with fewer entrepreneurs coming through the ecosystem, you want to attract as many great ones as you possibly can by giving them a best of breed place where they can come and work as well.
Yeah, it's definitely a characteristic of the Japanese market, right? A lot of entrepreneurs that we back are first-time entrepreneurs, which is not the case in the US, I think. People who have maybe not founded a company, but have had leadership positions in startups, going on to start new startups, that is still less common in Japan. So we're picking people from Japanese traditional companies and training them to become entrepreneurs.
Yeah, I wanted to dive a little bit deeper into your talent strategy. Yeah, how do you find mostly the entrepreneurs that you all are working with, and what are some of the traits that you are looking for, that they have the grit, or they have that there are going to be a successful entrepreneur, a successful founder as well?
Our founder sourcing is still pretty early stages, so we rely on our network a lot at this point. Former employees of portfolio companies are a great target. Also, just referrals from our network of CEOs. They get people from, let's say, companies they've worked for, come to them asking about entrepreneurship. People would be like, hey, I want to start a company. Where do I start? And now that we have this program, instead of them doing the mentoring and getting them ready for seed stage investment, they are referred to us as a way of starting a company with a person, an entrepreneur who knows that they want to start a company, but hasn't decided on what exactly to do yet. So those have been two great channels so far. How do we assess entrepreneurs? I think we, as a VC fund, through, again, a decade of investing, we've come to a conclusion that the entrepreneur and the qualities of the entrepreneur are the most important thing when investing. And we look for founders who are enraged by some injustice in the system or has an itch to right a wrong. Someone who is looking at making the world better rather than self-actualization, for example. So when we see those traits in a founder, we're really excited, and we're confident that we can create a go-to-market strategy with them and figure out what to do. But that's the one thing that you can't change about an entrepreneur. And when we find that seed, we go all in on it.
Yeah. Could you talk a little more about Spround as well?
So Spround came to be a great community of early stage entrepreneurs. It initially started out as a conversation of we have main investments that we invest in, maybe like upwards of 10, 20 million per company. And then we have seed stage investments that we want to become main investments. And they are on a 500K check. We can't use the same time and resources. So, one day we thought, why don't we have them all in one place? So what happened is that we have a floor in an office building in Tokyo where about 20 of our portfolio companies, all seed stage, are residing. And so that has become a great community. In seed stage, if you work at a seed stage startup, you're the only marketer or you're the only customer success executive. But then when you have 20 of those companies, you have knowledge sharing between companies. And so that has become a great way for us to support early stage companies to arrive at best practices faster and to avoid reinventing the wheel, essentially.
That's so powerful to be able to work in community with those other people that are part of the portfolio. And just back to your talent strategy as a whole, I think just how you think about people and talent and kind of the attraction and what does it take to attract the best kind of entrepreneurs. I think that just plays a lot into like that thesis and that ethos that you have. And so that's why I thought it was interesting just to highlight. Maybe to take this in a little bit of a different direction, but more specifically, I want to talk about just like Japanese entrepreneurship and the startup and VC kind of landscape as a whole, what makes it so attractive and maybe some distinctive just opportunities right now that you're seeing in the Japanese market for entrepreneurs and startups. I think broadly across the globe, we're at a pretty interesting time, but I think from what are the opportunities? A lot of change usually brings big opportunities. And so I'm curious kind of what are you seeing in the Japanese market in the moment?
I think it's very different from what you're seeing in the US. The US being a mature market, you have the ebbs and flows of the market, but Japan is still an emerging VC startup ecosystem. So more than the market trends, we have this macro trend of the industry itself growing and becoming an industry. So we have a lot of funding, both from institutions and government as well. I started a company in 2017 where you could not pay a competitive salary because of the lack of funding. Now startups are offering competitive comp, oftentimes higher than a traditional Japanese company would. There's more recognition that startup is a thing and it's becoming an industry. So that has changed the perception of entrepreneurship in Japan. Comes at a time where there is this huge shift from lifetime employment. So we're seeing high caliber talent entering the startup ecosystem, people with experience and talent that we didn't see, frankly, 10 years ago. So that's great. And then we also have a couple of unicorns in B2B space now. Employees of those companies are coming around, starting a new startup. Our next entrepreneur that we're looking to fund right now is coming from a Japanese SaaS unicorn. And so that cycle has started. In terms of macro trends, Japan is in high need of innovation. We have not only an aging population, but a shrinking one as well. And so the lack of labor is pretty significant. Just to give an example, rice prices in Tokyo are at a record high, and that's a compound problem. A lot of it is structural, but a big part of it is that there's just not enough people to tend to the crops. When rice prices are high, it really hits home. And so people are really starting to feel this lack of labor affecting everyday lives. What else? Japan is a unique market in that it's big enough to create a unicorn, and that has been proven. So you can build a sizable company there. Unfortunately, we haven't seen any decacorns yet. I think when you get to that scale, you're looking at a TAM that is the size of the Japanese population. And so you have to start creating compound startups, second products, third products, frequent conversation in our growth stage startups as well. Which is interesting, again, for venture studio model, because you need to be continuously launching new initiatives and bringing those to market even as your company grows.
I think some of those things add up in a really interesting way, though. When you think about shrinking population, fewer workers, the need to have a solution be so prolific to be able to hit like decacorn status, like it feels like AI creates some really unique opportunities there, right? Agentic AI can actually offset whole jobs rather than just subscription revenue. Wonder if that creates some opportunities where you can price in a different way, go to market in a different way, maybe ultimately grow up and handle larger and larger job level work instead of just task level work at a software level.
That's definitely a big part of our thesis going forward. I think the technology is getting there to be able to actually replace humans. The difficulty in that is in Japan, a lot of SaaS companies have to market to traditional companies, whereas in the US, you can build a sizable company within tech-savvy Silicon Valley or tech-savvy companies. So that's going to be a challenge. But the upside is that we can look at what is happening in the US and strive to emulate that because there will be a time lag. I don't think there's a time lag in terms of information now like it used to be 2 decades ago, but we will definitely see a time lag in terms of market adoption and market readiness. So a lot of companies will be able to take opportunity and take what's starting to be successful in the US, maybe even see through one hype cycle and then bring that to Japan when the market is ready.
When you think about like the way that Alloy's thesis is around building advantage startups alongside corporations and alongside entrepreneurs, and from what you're talking about from a corporate perspective, I think there's a real ingredient there of what does it take to build alongside a corporation who is traditionally using on-prem software, right, to be able to migrate them to the cloud, help them to adopt brand new solutions. I think that the types of problems that Japanese corporations face are world problems, right? They have supply chain problems, they have labor problems, they have finance problems. And any of those could get solved through startups. And for the ones that don't exist on the market, I think it creates a huge opportunity from a venture building perspective to go about building them. The trick is figuring out a way to do that with kind of a relatively small pool of entrepreneurs and a relatively tech kind of laggard set of corporations. But for anyone who can crack that with the capital and credibility to do that, there's a real opportunity to move startups forward.
I think it's a unique opportunity. Every time we look into an industry, there's so many things that we find that could be better still. And so that's definitely a blue ocean for a lot of SaaS entrepreneurs. And you mentioned a good point is that we are dealing with a smaller pool of entrepreneurs and a more conservative buyer's market. And so what we've seen through the past 2 studios that we've run, a real value in having founder market fit and experience in an industry, because you're selling to lifetime professionals in that industry. And I think it's true everywhere in the world, but you have less of those buyers that are willing to take a chance on a new technology or a unproven entrepreneur in Japan than you have in the US. You're going to have to sell to pretty traditional Japanese buying process, purchasing process. Founder fit goes a long way in building conviction in a more conservative market.
I'd be really curious as we wrap up a little bit here, but could you share a little more around last week's Sprint Week? And I think this kind of lays into a lot of the conversation we had of the problem that you all were tackling, the amazing entrepreneur with this idea that you all were working with last week. Could you maybe just share a little bit of last week and how some of these kind of wrap together, agentic AI, the evolution of some of the Japanese market and the kind of traditional corporations, and even changing laws and regulations that have caused a lot of this opportunity too?
Sure, where to begin? So last week we wrapped up Sprint Week for our second batch. She, our entrepreneur, spent 7 years at a non-life insurance company, went for an MBA and came back, started talking to us, telling us that he's not going to go back, he's going to start a company. And so that's how that came into form. And we worked with him for the past 4 months, interviewing a lot of insurance agencies and distributors. We ended up trying to tackle a huge problem in the Japanese insurance market, in that the agencies and distributors are fragmented and they are under increasing pressure from regulators to consolidate and to be more compliant in their operations, right? So Yuichi essentially is his long-term play is to try to replace a lot of these agencies through AI and by automating the sales process, which again, technologically is possible. But because a lot of these companies have existing client relations, is going to be difficult over time. We created a company that automates unnecessary customer interactions to start with. And that was phone calls, inbound phone calls. When we went to interview, Yuichi actually interned at 3 different agencies, spent like a week and a half in total with these 3 agencies, and just was surprised by the number of phone calls that there were in a day. Even with a small team of 3 people, they'd get 20, 30 phone calls. Sometimes they can't return their phone calls because these are consumers. And so this was a huge pain in kind of their daily operations. So we decided to tackle that with an eye to gradually shift communication to online versus in person and on phone calls. What that will enable us to do is to automate all of the back office work. And once we do that, we can create a digital native insurance agency that will ultimately aim to disrupt this whole market.
This is what I love about the venture building approach, right? VC perspective looks at the world, says there's a market failure that exists inside insurance. And the most obvious solution would be, shoot, we just need to go build a digital first insurance broker and just gobble it all up. That's not the way the market works because of these kind of entrenched solutions, these entrenched broker networks. And then you bring in an entrepreneur from the other direction who builds bottom up and says, shoot, how do we get to this big vision of online digital broker? And the answer is you solve whatever pain people will pay for immediately.
Yeah.
And by solving that first piece of pain, you then get access to whole back office and you can hire AI instead of hiring people. And since you're in the back office, you get access to data and that lets you move to sales. And since you're in front office, then you can move to online. I think it's just a really interesting model that takes what look like top-down gaps and then find the beginning places of where the incision point is and where to begin building along the way, which is such a perfect marriage of how DNX and DNX Studio work so well together.
Yeah, it was a really interesting process, starting from a bird's eye view approach, looking at regulatory changes and really identifying that the system is broken. But then when starting to create a company, going to ground zero and interning at these companies, taking these phone calls and trying to find an incision point that's real and tangible and valuable to the customer.
Well, it was a real pleasure to be part of Sprint Week with Yuma and the team to see how much work Yuichi had put into this and the amount of traction he managed to get inside of just 12 weeks, right, of work. Early customers on the phone, great early understanding of what products should look like, and then to see the DNX Studio team come alongside him and support, it's just a real delight. I can't wait to be launching more of these companies together.
Yeah, it's great. Yuichi's experience as a insurance salesman doing cartwheels to please his clients in rural Japan really kicked in.
Yeah. So as you're heading into the next cohort, what types of entrepreneurs are you seeking? How can we help even share the word as well around how entrepreneurs should get in touch with DNX if they're interested?
Sure. So we're pretty confident that we can coach someone on the how. So we don't necessarily require startup exposure. Yuichi is a great example of that. But we do want someone who is a hustler and that has that kind of founder mindset. Increasingly, we're looking at founder market fit because it really does accelerate customer discovery. Anyone with experience in the industry, if they want to improve, I think we're a great fit. And we have a website, DNX Studio. So if you can look us up, we're there. Please reach out wherever in the world you are. If you are interested in the Japanese market, please let me know.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Yuma, for being here in Indianapolis this week and for sitting down with us. Thank you, Ryan, for joining me as well. Very excited by this and happy we got to have this conversation.
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much.